And we're talking about networks, and I mentioned it earlier that you have links and you have nodes. Euler didn't call them links or nodes, he called them vertices and he called them edges. I think vertices is gone, but edges, some groups still call them edges. But I'd like to show you different types of networks, and it's important to understand this because how they relate is very interesting. So if you start here and you got a node here and you got a node here and you got a guy here, and these guys are connected to this guy, and then you get over here a node here and a node here, and this guy, they're all connected here, okay, and then you got another node over here and another node over here and another one here, and these guys are just connected by these are not connected. Just, I should make this over here a little further so they're not connected. Then what happens is you then have this person here that's connected to this one and connected to this one and connected to this one. Now, while this may, I should probably make that better. This is 0 and 0, and they're connected to the guy right here. So what you've got now is these three connected to this guy, these three connected to this guy, these three connected to this guy. Now that is one type of network, and it's a very important type because it's very, very different than many of the types. So when you start to look at this, basically you're going to find that this is these links right here, every one of these links, okay, are very rigid. They're going one way. Who has all the information is the guy in the center. This is the guy with all the thing. This is very, very rigid, and it's quite often, and it's basically called a hierarchy. And in this hierarchy basically is used basically in like the military has a hierarchy, okay? If you look at families, there's usually a hierarchy. If you look in the agrarian ages, you'll find that a lot of things were run that way, where the top person really had the information. Now this works, you know, and the advantage to this is basically is the question basically of called. See, we live in a democracy which is not a hierarchy. China, by the way, is basically a hierarchy in that they can move much faster and make changes a lot faster because they don't have to deal with the messiness of democracy, and it's very, very fast. The problem with this, okay, is that once you get these nodes get linked, like this one now links with this one, and they go that way, and this one now links with this one, and okay, and you bring it all the way around over here, and this one links with this one. Now all of a sudden, you've totally changed it. It's no longer rigid. You've got the guy at the top is no longer in control, and that's why when people live in a top-down hierarchical place, it's very dangerous because they're always worried about conspiracy. They see this as, you know, maybe these guys are getting around me, going around me, and of course once they do that, it changes the whole, what it looks like. And so a hierarchy is very, very difficult. Okay, so you look over there at a hierarchy which is extremely rigid, but easily toppled, and that's why you see the paranoia in, you know, any country that has that type of thing. I mean, Russia right now has the same thing. And so you're starting to see that this is a paranoia, okay? Now you go on over now and let's take a look at the difference between what I call a rigid one, and then I want to go over and look at the other side of that, basically, which is called, loose. A loose one is not have any center. You've got people connected in all different directions, so it's not a, you know, it's not anywhere near the same type of dynamic, so that you've got maybe over here, you've got a group of people that are together, and then they go over here, and you got another group of people together, and you start to see that these people meet this way, and this one may meet this way, and you can create a very large cluster this way. And what's going on here now is that these are all connected in an interesting way, okay, so that you don't have the same problems that you have here. It's very flexible, it's very loose. Now the problem with this is that if you want to get something done, it's much, much slower. So you've got to look at the speed in this is slow, okay, but it's more like democracy. And if you talk about it, you know, I don't know if you know who Dutopo was, but he was a guy who came over from England and did a whole bunch of studies about America during the, you know, in the 1700s or early 1800s. And basically, Dutopo said that this looseness of the way people related to each other was perfect for democracy. So our country was running beautifully because of this sort of looseness and much more flexible, okay? This is slow, this is fast, but this is much more robust. So if you break out one of these nodes out of here, you don't hurt it. But if you break out one of these nodes or these nodes, you really hurt a hierarchy. So that while they both have advantages, okay, this one there is no synergy because you've got the top's got it, but he has no synergy or she has no synergy. And so for synergy requires a minimum of 2, and even more is better. So that what you've got over here is no synergy at all, because you can't. And if without synergy, which is over, not here, but synergy over here, and what happens is that synergy is the thing that really moves progress forward. It's where basically the whole concept of innovation requires synergy. You have to, groups get together, minds work together. This does not have it. Therefore, eventually, it has to topple because it cannot keep up with the speed of transformation. And a culture, of course, it has to be a culture of cooperation and mistakes, etc. There's a lot going on here, but the point here is that these are very, very, very hardwired, difficult. Over here, they're very loose. And this looseness and hierarchy, now, what you've got to see here is that they're not, basically, this is not an either or. It's basically a continuum, so that you have very, very rigid over here and very, very loose over here. And what happens is the varying degrees. For instance, if you look at a clique of people is when they all get together, and what you start to see in a clique is it's not totally rigid, and it's clearly not loose. So what you've got in a clique is you've got everybody in here, and they all know each other, and they all know each other directly or indirectly. And so what happens is that the clique is hard to break into, okay, because you've got to know everybody to really be part of a clique. And so the clique is not as rigid as this, but it's way less loose than what we're talking about over here. So that this is like a continuum of process. So you want to be looking at your stuff and saying, is this a rigid or is it a loose one? And there are tremendous advantages to the loose one. Now, the loose one, if it gets going too fast, okay, and gets way out ahead of some of its members, you're going to see them react and want something less than that. They're going to want to go back to the basics or back to a more rigid hierarchy. And so you can see there's a potential of this going too fast, and they're going to head backwards. It's called back to the basics. Now, this may happen and may work, but only temporarily. Sooner or later, this side, the loose connective, the creativity, the innovation, and all of that comes out of the democracy side. And the people over here, all they can do is copy, which makes it very, very difficult for them. So you've got to have the culture for this too. I mean, if you look at Japan, Japan is extremely talented in duplicating, but because they have a culture that does not allow for mistakes. By the way, mistakes are absolutely essential part of innovation. And so without mistakes, and you lose face in Japan when you make a mistake, and therefore innovation is not at the level it could be if they were willing to make part of their culture mistakes. Mistakes are not real mistakes, they're really learning experiences, and until that gets to be part of the culture in Japan, it's going to be lag behind economically to countries like America and England and France. These countries are much more loose in the way they relate to one another. So when you start to study anything, you want to look at the connections, and are they a strong connection and rigid, or are they strong but loose, and that it's easy to come in and out of. If they can come in and out of, they're going to be loose and they're going to grow faster, it's going to innovate. So the ideal scene now is to have a loose network that doesn't go too fast, because if it goes too fast, you start to see it going what I call back to the basics. And when that happens, they want to go back to over there, and it's temporary. It won't work. In fact, it never does work because the basics are never really there. You can't go backwards because everything's moving forward. So that's it.